Welcome to the Biopharma Business Intelligence Unit, where symbolic integrity meets strategic clarity. At BBIU, we go beyond the headlines to decode the structural forces behind global biopharma, AI, and economic realignment. If you value precision, verification, and symbolic depth, this channel is for you. Subscribe now to access our weekly briefings, dossiers, and intelligence reports, and consider joining our institutional tier to unlock early warning systems, custom metrics, and exclusive strategic insight. You're not just listening, you're entering the future of epistemic intelligence. www.biopharmabusinessintelligenceunit.com.
Steel Squeeze 2025, EU's 50% tariff layer on Korean exports. Executive summary. The European Commission has formalized a plan to have tariff-free import quotas for steel to 18.3 million tons, a 47%, and to raise duties on excess volumes from 25% to 50%, effective after the current safeguard expires in June 2026. This measure mirrors U.S. protectionism, creating a dual high-tariff squeeze on Korean steel, the EU being its second-largest market, 3.93 million tons in 2024. The blow is compounded by the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, due January 2026, which will impose carbon-linked costs on steel, cement, and aluminum, with further extension to general industrial goods under review. Together, these measures represent a structural tightening of Europe's industrial trade regime. South Korea's Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy announced bilateral engagement, citing Korea's FTA status with the EU. Industry associations in Europe are split. Steelmakers welcome the quota cuts, while automakers warn of higher costs and bureaucratic burden. Structural findings: quota compression. Korea risks losing nearly half of its EU export volume to tariff-free status. With 3.93 mountain shipped in 2024, a significant portion may now face 50% duties. CBAM superposition. Even within quotas, exporters must bear carbon costs, eroding margins further. Expansion of CBAM to appliances and automotive parts could trap downstream Korean industries. Strategic parallel. The EU now follows the U.S. extraction model, prioritizing domestic industry protection and climate alignment over WTO norms. Industrial split in EU. ArcelorMittal supports the measure. ASEA automobile lobby opposes it due to input cost inflation. BBIU structured opinion. Beyond the surface of Europe's steel tariff wall. The European Commission's October 7th proposal to have tariff-free steel quotas and double the duty on out-of-quota shipments to 50% has been widely presented in official and media channels as a defensive maneuver, protection against global overcapacity, and more importantly, as the logical extension of the EU's climate agenda through the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. However, a deeper structural reading reveals that the move is not a climate policy in essence, but rather an opportunistic fusion of fiscal extraction, industrial incubation, and geopolitical balancing, executed under the banner of decarbonization. 1. Fiscal extraction, disguised as climate alignment. If the measure were genuinely designed to reduce emissions, quotas would be differentiated according to carbon intensity per ton of steel. Cleaner exporters would be rewarded with larger quotas, dirtier producers penalized with narrower ones. Instead, Brussels imposed a linear 47% cut across the board, irrespective of emissions profiles. This uniform reduction is inconsistent with the carbon narrative, but entirely consistent with fiscal strategy. Every foreign exporter, regardless of efficiency, is forced into the CBAM regime, purchasing certificates at ETS prices 70 to 90 TCO2. The result is a predictable stream of revenue into EU coffers, effectively Europe's first supranational tax, framed as environmental justice. 2. Industrial incubation through protectionist geometry. The real beneficiaries are not legacy German steelmakers struggling with high costs, but the embryonic green steel projects in Sweden, Austria, and France. These projects, heavily subsidized and far from competitive against Asian supply, require a protected domestic market to survive their gestation. By slashing quotas and layering CBAM on top, Brussels engineers a captive demand pool where European green steel can command higher prices under state support, while external competitors are burdened with fiscal drag. The rhetoric of strategic autonomy is thus operationalized as controlled market closure, designed not for climate per se, but for industrial policy under scarcity. 3. Geopolitical balancing under global contraction. The timing is crucial. Global economic torque, Or more plainly, the size of the world's economic cake is shrinking. China's subsidized overcapacity, which once could be absorbed by a growing global economy, now threatens to overwhelm fragile markets. Beijing cannot allow its subsidized steel sector to collapse without risking social unrest. Dumping abroad is survival, not strategy. The EU, facing stagnation, cannot accept such dumping without sacrificing its nascent green industry. Thus, the CBAM wall becomes a geopolitical filter. Allow limited cheap imports to sustain European downstream industries, automotive, machinery, but block the flood that would obliterate green steel. Europe manages the contradiction by turning climate into a tool of realpolitik, contain Chinese overcapacity while taxing everyone else. Before, transatlantic complementarity, not opposition. The July 2025 Trump-EU Accord fixing a 15% tariff baseline seemed to shield Europe from Washington's extraction. Yet Trump's subsequent sectoral tariffs, 100% on branded pharmaceuticals, 50% on furniture, 25% on trucks, demonstrated that the 15% was not a ceiling but a floor for discretionary escalation. Europe learned the lesson. Rather than confront Trump, it mirrors him through a different syntax. Washington weaponizes blunt tariffs, Brussels weaponizes climate compliance. Both are extraction mechanisms designed to finance costly reindustrialization projects. Far from being opposites, they are complementary. Trump cuts with the knife of nationalism, Brussels decorates the cake with green icing, but both secure their slice first. Number 5. The symbolic order: smaller cake, bigger knives. At the symbolic level, the EU's move demonstrates the new grammar of global trade. The cake is smaller, but every actor insists on keeping its slice intact. The official language may be climate, rules-based order, or America first, but the underlying logic is identical. Redistribute the cost of domestic transformation outward onto exporters desperate for access to Western markets. Korea, Turkey, and Japan, though not the intended targets, become collateral losers, trapped between Washington's tariff wall and Brussels' carbon wall. China, the structural adversary, is forced to redirect dumping to secondary regions: Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, reshaping the geography of surplus steel. BBIU judgment. The European Union's steel measure is not a mere technical extension of safeguards, nor a neutral climate mechanism. It is a strategic act of fiscal industrial opportunism executed in synchrony with U.S. extraction under conditions of global economic contraction. The quota cut and CBAM together constitute a dual-layer filter. First layer, tariff-style reduction of accessible volume, minus 47%. Second layer, fiscal siphoning of all remaining imports through carbon certificates. For Korea, the signal is unambiguous. Incremental adjustments or bilateral pleading will not suffice. Unless its steel sector undergoes accelerated transformation toward hydrogen-based or ultra-low carbon processes, it will lose both access and competitiveness. The EU's carbon wall, far from a climate instrument, is a structural declaration of a new trade order, where fiscal sovereignty and industrial autonomy outweigh WTO multilateralism. You've reached the end of the open section of this BBIU content. The complete analysis, with full data, structural frameworks, and extended annexes, is available exclusively to our subscribers. At BBIU, we believe the real value lies beyond headlines, in the depth of structural intelligence that helps leaders and organizations see further. If you want access to the complete archive and future reports, join us at BBIU and take part in the next level of analysis.